Oops. Alright, this should be for my period 4 or my period 6 class on Tuesday, November 19th, right? I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong. Alright, you should have this frame in front of you. It has relation, independent variable, dependent variable, all that stuff. Alright, our key topic today is independent and dependent variables. Independent and dependent variables is about understanding the relationship between variables. Okay, and we have a couple of things that we need to define with this. So independent and dependent variables is about understanding the relationship between variables. Before we can really get this going, we need to know first off what a relation is, independent variable, and dependent variable. Alright, relation. When one thing depends on another, comma, they form a relation. They relate to each other. Okay? So relation, when one thing depends on another, they form a relation. Alright, we have the independent variable. The independent variable we can choose to change. Whoops. So we personally can manipulate the independent variable. We can decide what the independent variable is and what it's going to look like. Alright, our dependent variable changes based on the value of independent variable. Okay, so independent variable we can choose to change. Dependent variable changes based on value of independent variable. Alright, if we go down to the bottom here, we have our independent and dependent table. Okay, so we're going to list a couple of things that are dependent on the independent or independent on the dependent. So one thing that's independent is input of a function. The dependent is the output. So whatever we put into a function, we can change. We can put usually whatever x we want, or we can input anything into a machine, and then the output is going to change depending on the input. Alright, another thing that's independent is usually the x-axis is independent, and then the y-axis depends off the x-axis. Alright. Another thing that's independent is domain, and what we call the opposite of domain is the range. So depending on our domain is what we get for our range. Another thing is cause and effect. Cause and effect. Usually our independent variable is going to be x, and then our dependent is going to be y. And then If our dependent is after, something that affects the after is the before. Okay, and I'm going to challenge you to come up with this last part. So pause the video here, talk as a class, decide what do you think is two things. One thing that's independent, one thing that's dependent, and then play the video again. So pause, discuss, write one down, and then play the video. Alright, at this point you should have discussed already. We're going to move on to in words, so deciding what independent variables are and dependent variables are in words. And this really comes into play in word problems when we write out our equations. So it's important that we can identify them now in words before we deal with them in word problems. So we're going to underline the independent variables and we are going to circle the dependent variables. So how many minutes used into your cell phone bill? So does the minutes used depend on what you get for a cell phone bill, or does your cell phone bill depend on your minutes used? Usually you use so many minutes and then you get your cell phone bill that says how much you owe. Okay, your math grade and time spent studying. So does this work as in I say you get a 4 and then you're going to spend so much hours studying, or do you spend time studying and then I say, oh, you did good on your test, you get a math grade? Yep, that's usually the way it works. So usually, depending on the time you study, you get a better or worse grade. Alright? Hours you work and money you make. This could kind of go either way, but usually in most jobs it depends on the hours you work and then you can make your money. Okay? How fast you drive and the time it takes you to get somewhere. Well, if you're following the speed limits, usually it's how fast you drive and then the time it takes to get somewhere. Okay? Who wins the football game and who scores more points? Well, after the football game, you could say the Vikings won more, or the Vikings won, so they probably scored more points. But throughout the entire game, they'd say that the Vikings scored more points, and thus they won the football game against the Packers, because Vikings won. Alright. Then we have our temperature and how much air conditioning you use. Alright, so if I use 30 degree, if I use a ton of air conditioning on me, does that say that temperature you have to be hot, it has to be sunny out? No. Usually because it's hot out, we then use how much air conditioning we need. Okay? How much gas you have and how far you can drive. Can you say, well, I need to drive 1,000 miles, so I need X amount of gas? No. You need to know how much gas you have first before you can determine how far you can drive. Okay. So what? What's important to understand about this? It's important to know what you can change in your relationship. Alright, so for the rest of the class period, you are going to be working on the back side of this frame and completing it to the best of your ability. Alright, thank you. Have a good day. Bye, guys.